Hey there, Drowsy Historian here. Tonight you're stepping into the stone halls and cloisters of a 12th century monastery, where the candles flicker against cold walls, the air smells faintly of cabbage and ink, and the hours stretch long and disciplined. You're not an abbot or a seasoned monk, just a novice, learning the rhythms of prayer, labour, and quiet endurance. Before we start, do me one small favour. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is there. If you prefer these stories without ads, you can join the Patreon. It's linked in the description. And if you want the ultimate immersive experience, consider using a pair of wireless earbuds. They're comfortable, discreet, and designed so you can wear them even while sleeping. I've linked my favourite pair, plus other sleep tools, in the description. Now, lie back. Get comfortable. Let's begin. You find yourself approaching the monastery long before the sun has decided what to do with the morning. The world is still half asleep, resting in that fragile, pale hour between night and day, when even the birds seem unsure whether it is acceptable to start singing, yet a thin mist curls around your ankles as you walk, soft and cool, as if the earth is exhaling. The scent of damp hay drifts from a nearby byre, mingling with the faint sweetness of something flowering in the undergrowth. Every inhalation carries the quiet reminder that you are very much awake, and perhaps more awake than you ever intended to be. Ahead, the cloister gate waits. Its wooden planks are weathered to a silvery patience, as though centuries of sleepy novices have already leaned their foreheads against it, gathering courage before entering. You pause just briefly, listening to the muted creak of the hinges shifting in the breeze. The monastery doesn't quite loom, it merely stands there, solemn and absurdly serene, like a very old man who has seen too many enthusiastic young people stumble toward devotion and is no longer surprised by it. You tug your cloak a little closer around you, though it has absorbed more dew than warmth. It occurs to you, quietly, almost apologetically, that if holiness truly begins at this hour, it is less a blaze of revelation and more the stubborn determination to pretend you are not cold. Still, something draws you forward, something in the hush of the moment that feels ancient and promising. A soft crunch of gravel accompanies your steps as you cross the threshold. The courtyard beyond is dim, lit only by a handful of lanterns that glow like thoughtful little stars trapped behind glass. The buildings form a square around you, stone walls worn smooth by time, cloister arches that frame long corridors, and windows dark as closed eyes. Everything seems to be breathing in a slow, steady rhythm, the same calm tempo that monks have followed for generations. You can almost imagine the centuries layering gently upon one another, each year settling like dust upon the flagstones. Your breath makes faint clouds in front of you, dissolving as soon as they appear, and you wonder whether you're supposed to feel something grander. A sense of calling, perhaps, a thrum of celestial approval. Instead, you feel the vague suspicion that your toes are slowly turning into small, icy stones inside your shoes. The monastery remains indifferent to your discomfort, which seems to be its preferred method of welcoming visitors. A figure moves in the distance, hooded, slow, deliberate. The monk glides across the courtyard, as though his feet barely touch the ground, or perhaps he simply knows which patches of stone are least likely to bite at his soles. You try to imitate his quiet gait, but your steps remain plainly mortal, echoing with a soft clack that betrays your presence. The monk nods once, not unkindly, and drifts away beneath one of the archways. His robe sways with the lightest whisper of cloth on stone, and for a moment you observe him with something like awe. How does someone walk like that? Perhaps it is a skill taught after vows, somewhere between humility and quiet endurance. The air smells faintly of extinguished candles, warm wax, lingering smoke, a touch of resin from the incense used in the night prayers. It is a smell that clings to the monastery. The way fatigue clings to your shoulders, you follow it without quite meaning to, drawn through the shadows to where the chapel rises on the far side of the courtyard. Its door is half open, allowing a thin ribbon of golden light to spill across the stones. The glow seems too gentle to belong to anything as demanding as devotion, but you sense the weight of sacred hours inside. Before you enter, you stand beneath the stone arch and listen. There is a hush to the place, not the sharp silence of emptiness, but the soft woolen quiet that wraps itself around communities built on stillness. Somewhere deeper in the building, you hear the faint murmur of voices, a low hum, perfectly synchronized, soothing in its constancy. It sounds like a river trying to remember a song it learned long ago. You step inside, and the temperature drops just enough to remind you that stone is less forgiving than sky. The interior of the chapel is simple but dignified, with tall pillars supporting a ceiling, lost in shadows. Candles flicker along the walls, their flames swaying with tiny gestures of encouragement, as though they're doing their best to stay awake on your behalf. Rows of wooden stools line the sides, worn with use, and you feel their history beneath your fingertips. Generations of hands, folded in prayer or pressed in weary reconsideration. The chanting grows clearer now. A small group of monks stands near the front, facing the altar. Their voices overlap in a slow, unwavering cadence, each tone sliding into the next, like ripples merging on a quiet pond. It is peaceful, undeniably so, yet also tinged with the faintest note of stubborn discipline. You sense that these are men who have risen at this hour every day for years, not because it became easy, but because they eventually stopped questioning it. Part of you wants to join them, simply to be carried along by the sound. Another part, the honest, sleep-deprived part, wonders whether choosing this life means never again experiencing what most people call a reasonable morning. The monks' faces are serene, illuminated by candlelight that smooths their features into soft lines. They look content in a way that feels both inspiring and slightly suspicious. Surely no one is this peaceful before dawn unless they've surrendered something sizable, such as the will to argue with their alarm bell. A long bench near the side invites you to sit, and you carefully lower yourself onto it. The wood groans a little, sympathetic to your fatigue. As you settle, you notice how the air holds a faint chill that seeps through layers of fabric with patient determination. The chill is not cruel. It is simply a reminder that stone buildings and early mornings have an unspoken alliance. The dampness in the air carries the scent of old manuscripts, candle smoke, and something herbal. Perhaps the lingering breath of rosemary kept near the altar to mask the less poetic smells of humanity. Your eyes grow heavy, not with sleep exactly, but with the weight of the atmosphere, the slow cadence of chanting, the dim flicker of the candles. It is a peaceful heaviness, the kind that makes your limbs feel distant from the rest of you. The chapel seems to sway gently, not physically, but in the way thoughts drift when allowed to settle like snow. You breathe deeply, letting the chill fill your lungs before exhaling warmth back into the air. Your breath curls upward, disappearing into shadows that look older than logic. For a moment, you feel an odd tenderness toward the place. Despite the cold, despite the hour, despite the creeping suspicion that you may have overestimated your enthusiasm for holy discipline, the monastery has a strange way of holding you. Not tightly, more like an old cloak hung over your shoulders, worn heavy and unexpectedly comforting. Somewhere outside, a bell tolls once, just once, as if clearing its throat. The sound reverberates through the chapel, softening as it travels, like a reminder that time still exists, even in places where it seems reluctant to move. The monks finish their chant, bow their heads, and stand still for a long moment. The stillness is contagious. You feel yourself sinking into it, anchored by a calm that could easily be mistaken for acceptance. When they move again, it is quiet and unhurried. Their robes glide behind them, brushing the floor with a whisper. They drift deeper into the monastery, their path leading toward a corridor, shadowed by stone columns. You rise, stretching subtly, and follow at a respectful distance. Something gentle guides your steps, not devotion yet, but curiosity softened by a sense of reluctant fondness. The corridor awaits, dim and cool, stretching endlessly into the early morning quiet. And as you walk toward it, you begin to understand, slowly, softly, how a day in this place might unfold, and how devotion often begins with a small, sleepy step into the cold. The corridor seems to gather the last remnants of candlelight as you enter, swallowing the warm glow and replacing it with a muted grey that clings to the stones like morning frost. Your footsteps soften automatically, as though the walls expect you to tread gently upon their ancient patience. The cool air drifts along the passage, carrying hints of beeswax, wood smoke, and the lingering incense from the chapel you've just left behind. There is a solemnity to it, but also a quiet humour, as if the monastery itself knows how early it is and is politely pretending it doesn't mind. A monk waits for you near a narrow doorway farther down. His hood is lowered now, revealing a face carved by years of calm expectations. His eyes, half-lidded but observant, rest on you with the serene curiosity one might use when encountering a visiting starling that has wandered into the cloister. He gestures with a small incline of his head, and you approach, sensing that something ceremonial, though perhaps not ceremonious, is about to unfold. Inside the small room, the scent changes. There is wool here, a great deal of wool, dry wool, damp wool, wool recently pressed, wool quietly sulking on a wooden bench. Bales of it line the walls like silent witnesses to the decisions of countless novices who stood where you stand now. You feel an odd shiver of anticipation, though it might simply be the room's stubborn coolness. The monk lifts a folded garment from a low shelf. It looks humble enough, coarse fabric, unadorned, the colour of river stones on a cloudy day. But he holds it with a certain gravity, as though it is not merely clothing, but a declaration whispered in woven threads. When he places it into your hands, the robe seems to sigh, heavy and self-assured, as if pleased with its own simplicity. You attempt a cautious squeeze. The wool pushes back with a texture so unyielding that it could be mistaken for a philosophical stance. It is scratchy in a way that feels intentional, as though designed by someone who believed too much comfort might lead the soul astray. Yet, strangely, the cloth also carries a type of pride, quiet, sturdy, and entirely convinced that holiness should feel slightly abrasive. The monk steps aside so you may change. He waits without impatience, his arms folded, his expression one of gentle neutrality. You release a long breath and begin to dress, the wool rustling like a reluctant companion. As you slide your arms through the sleeves, the fabric scrapes pleasantly along your skin, offering a sensation that can only be described as character building. The robe settles against your body with surprising weight, pressing faintly into your shoulders and making you aware of every movement. You notice immediately that the garment has two temperatures at once. One patch feels mysteriously warm, as though it spent the night near a hearth, while another patch is unmistakably damp, as though it spent that same night reconsidering its commitment to dryness. The mixture creates an unpredictable pattern, a geography of textures that seems determined to keep you alert. The hem brushes against your ankles, stirring little eddies of cool air. The robe's drape suggests dignity, but its stiffness suggests you will need to earn that dignity by becoming used to its demands. The cord that fastens it around your waist is equally practical, made of a thick twist of fibres that would happily double as a small rope if necessary. When you knot it, the knot does not look elegant, but the robe looks content enough with your effort. Once fully dressed, you catch sight of yourself in a small polished piece of metal set into the wall. The reflection is dim and distorted, but you can still make out your figure, draped in heavy wool, haloed by faint grey light, standing awkwardly between the realms of worldly freedom and monastic routine. For a moment, you wonder whether you resemble the monks you saw earlier in the chapel. Perhaps a little, though their robes seem to settle around them with natural grace, while yours seems to cling with the enthusiasm of a determined barn cat. The monk studying you gives a small nod of approval, not exuberant, but politely supportive. He motions for you to follow him deeper into the room. There, neatly arranged on a wooden table, lies the rest of the novice's attire: a narrow belt pouch for small necessities, a pair of sandals with straps, clearly designed by someone unconcerned with human arches, and a simple coif for your head. The coif, when placed upon you, immediately proves that wool can cling to hair in ways you had not previously imagined. He helps you adjust the fabric, his movements practiced and unhurried. The wool muffles your hearing slightly, giving the world a soft, cushioned quality, as though all sharp sounds have been gently wrapped away out of consideration. For your nerves, you discover that this head covering amplifies whispers of movement, the rustle of robes, the quiet scuff of sandals, the faint exhale of stone settling under its own age. When he steps back, the monk gives a faint, approving smile. Not a warm smile exactly, but the kind that suggests you now look appropriately monastic and moderately uncomfortable. This, it seems, is the natural order of things. The two of you step out into the corridor once more. The early light has begun to stretch its fingers across the flagstones, making the grey stones glow with a shy illumination. The robe moves stiffly as you walk, brushing your legs in a rhythm that feels like a soft, repetitive reminder of your choices. You shift your shoulders, trying to find an angle where the wool is less determined to start conversations with your skin. The first breeze that catches the fabric reveals another truth. The robe holds the chill with remarkable commitment. It is not a garment designed for luxury. It is an exercise in tolerating the world with calm resignation. And yet there is something oddly companionable about it, a steadying weight at your back, a fullness around your sides that makes each breath feel a touch deeper. You pass a narrow window slit where early dawn filters through. The light lands upon your sleeve, revealing tiny fibres, curled like ancient oak roots. You imagine each one spun and twisted by hands that believed deeply in the virtue of perseverance. The robe may not feel forgiving, but it carries a history of devotion woven into every stubborn thread. As you move through the passage, you become aware of how differently the monks look at you now. Their gazes are not intrusive. They simply drift your way with quiet acknowledgement, as if recognizing that you have stepped through a small but significant threshold. Their nods are subtle, serene, threaded with a humour so soft it barely stirs the air. A few monks cross your path, their robes swaying with the measured fluidity of practiced movement. You try to follow their example, but your robe shifts with a will of its own, tugging here, bunching there, reminding you that familiarity takes time. The wool grazes your wrists, its scratch inviting you to wakefulness, as though gently suspecting that your mind might drift back towards sleep at any moment. You continue down the long corridor, the robe's rhythm slowly syncing with your steps. With each footfall, the fabric makes a quiet, shuffling sound, like pages turning in a very patient book. The scent of wool follows you, mingling with the cold stone air, until the two aromas become indistinguishable. And as you near the end of the passage, you begin to sense another layer to the morning. The stirrings of daily tasks, the subtle sighs of wooden tools, the faint clatter of preparation somewhere in the depths of the monastery. Your robe shifts again, settling itself against your skin, as if preparing you for whatever the day intends to bring. You draw in a slow breath. The wool smells faintly of lanolin and dampness, humility and persistence. It hugs your shoulders with the reluctant affection of something that knows it will be with you for a very long time. And whether or not you are ready for it, you feel the day quietly gathering around you, waiting for your next hesitant step into the life you've chosen. However scratchy, solemn, or unexpectedly tender it may turn out to be. The corridor narrows as you continue walking, the stones beneath your sandals smoothing into a path travelled 1,000 times by feet more accustomed to cold hours than yours. The air is still carrying that mingled scent of wool and candle smoke, drifting around you like a slow-moving thought. Every step you take presses the robe closer against your skin, and the weight of it seems to nudge you forward, urging you towards some unspoken duty waiting in the shadows ahead. A soft sound reaches your ears. Not quite a bell, not quite a whisper. Something in between, like a metal tongue clearing its throat from another room. It trembles along the stones, and before your mind fully grasps its meaning, your body begins to understand it. You are being summoned again, even though the morning has barely begun. The monastery holds its own clock, and you are learning very quickly that its hours hope you will be prompt. You turn a corner into a broader hallway, where the air thins with a faint drift of incense. Somewhere beyond the archway, flames move gently, flickering in small circles of gold. The glow pulls you forward, promising light, if not warmth. The chill follows anyway, sliding beneath your robe with the determination of a seasoned companion. A pair of monks glides past you, their footfalls barely audible. You fall into step behind them, without being told, letting their steady pace become your guide. They walk with the kind of smooth confidence reserved for those who wake before dawn. So often, they've forgotten what it feels like to sleep until the sun has opinions. Their robes sway rhythmically, brushing against their ankles in soft motions that seem more like the size of an old tapestry than anything human. You arrive at the chapel once more, its door pulled open, just wide enough to welcome the procession of heavy wool and half-woken souls. As you step inside, darkness presses gently around you, the kind that is not absolute but attentive, listening. Candlelight ripples across the walls, in trembling patches, and the cold, still loyal, settles around your shoulders with a familiar hand. The scent of incense is stronger here, mingling with the faint sweetness of beeswax and the more subtle undertone of centuries-old stone. You feel the hush deepen as your sandals touch the chapel floor. The wood gives slightly beneath your weight, but even that sound seems to hush itself, reminded where it is. The monks around you begin taking their places, slipping into the wooden stalls with practiced movements that barely disturb the air. You follow, choosing a spot where the candlelight reaches you in thin strands. When you sit, the bench presses against your back with the firmness of something ready to remind you of posture and purpose. For a moment, everything stills. The breath of the room becomes a shared one. A faint shiver runs through you, not entirely from the cold. It is the strange sense of being held by silence, the kind that seems older than the building, older than the men inside it, older even than the words they are about to speak. Then the chanting begins. It starts with a single voice, low, steady, as if rising from deep beneath the earth. Another voice joins it, then another, weaving together in slow, measured tones that echo softly between the pillars. The sound does not rush or insist. It simply unfurls like mist lifting from a river. A rhythm settles in the air, one so calm that your breathing begins to follow its cadence without your permission. You sit very still, watching the candle flame near your stool flicker in small, thoughtful gestures, as though it too is trying to keep time with the chant. The voices rise and fall with the ease of a tide that has watched many moons pass. There is something soothing in their repetition, a comfort in knowing the melody is older than you, older than your doubts, older than every novice who ever fought sleep in this very stall. But soothing does not prevent drowsiness. You feel it creep in slowly, first as a heaviness in your eyelids, then as a soft, buzzing warmth behind your forehead. The robe's weight does nothing to help. It lays across your body like a woolen lullaby. You straighten your back a bit, hoping the fresh rush of cold air will bring clarity. It helps, but only barely. Devotion, you discover, is remarkably polite when it wants to guide someone into a doze. The chant shifts into a deeper tone. A rumble travels through the room, not loud but encompassing, like the low drone of bees gathering in the hollow of a tree. The harmony wraps itself around you, soft but persistent, nudging you into a drifting state where senses blur just slightly. You feel your head tilt a fraction forward, your fingers loosen their grip on the edge of the stool. Your breath slows. A monk near you clears his throat, the gentlest possible sound, and the tiny interruption lifts you back toward consciousness with an embarrassed flutter. You blink several times, steadying yourself. The monk does not look at you, but his presence radiates a quiet understanding, as if every novice in recorded history has nearly dozed off during matins, and he is merely honouring a long tradition. You pull in a deeper breath. The air tastes faintly metallic, touched by stone and smoke. The candle beside you leans slightly as a draught slips through the chapel, sending its flame into a small dance. The shadows on the walls sway with it, creating shapes that pulse slowly, like breathing giants who have found peace in their slumber. The chanting continues, each phrase stretching gently into the next. You find the rhythm again, but this time you stay alert enough to feel the subtler layers woven into it, the quiet determination beneath the calm, the centuries of intention folded into each note, the steady pulse of faith carried by voices that do not need to be strong to be sure. Your robe shifts as you adjust your weight, releasing a faint smell of lanolin that mingles easily with the fragrance of incense. The scratchiness along your collarbone becomes noticeable again, small but persistent, reminding you that devotional garments have their own opinions about comfort. You accept its presence with weary amusement. Perhaps everything here is designed to keep a person from drifting too far into sleep. A moment passes, though it feels suspended, neither long nor short. Then the chant softens. The voices taper into silence, one after another, like small lights being gently extinguished. The chapel returns to stillness, deeper than before, settling around you like a blanket drawn up to the chin. The monks rise, not all at once, but in a quiet ripple of movement. Wood creaks softly, wool brushes against wool. The faint scent of extinguished candles thickens as a gust from the corridor slips inside. You follow them, easing onto your feet. Your legs feel slightly unsteady, as though unsure whether they should be proud of staying awake or disappointed that they nearly failed. You drift with the procession toward the exit. The cold greets you as you step into the corridor, sharper now, tinged with the first hints of dawn. Somewhere outside, a bird tries a tentative chirp, then seems to reconsider, returning the world to its sleepy murmur. The robe tugs gently at your shoulders as you walk, its weight steadying you against the lingering fog in your mind. You breathe in the coolness, letting it clear the remnants of drowsiness. The candlelight from the chapel spills across the floor behind you, guiding your steps only briefly before fading into the shadows. You continue forward, the air brightening almost imperceptibly as morning stretches itself awake. The stone beneath your feet grows less cold by the slightest degree, as if acknowledging your perseverance. And with each quiet step, you feel the monastery drawing you deeper into its rhythm. Slow, careful, a little drowsy, and endlessly committed to beginning its days in the dark. You step away from the chapel, the cool air of the corridor immediately brushing against your cheeks, carrying with it a faint whisper of stone and lingering incense. Your feet slide softly over the worn flagstones, which are smooth from centuries of careful, tiptoeing traffic. The robe clings to you with the gentle insistence of an old companion, and each movement makes the coarse fabric rustle with a subdued murmur that feels far too loud in this environment. You lower your shoulders, willing both your body and the wool to speak only in the quietest of gestures. The corridor stretches ahead, long and narrow, shadowed where the morning light hesitates to enter. Small slits of window let in timid rays, painting rectangles of pale gold on the grey stones. The silence is profound, as though the walls themselves are allergic to sound. You notice it first in the way your breathing carries farther than expected, echoing faintly along the arches. Then you notice it in the shuffle of your sandals, in the soft hiss of your robe brushing your legs. Everything seems to amplify, even the smallest noise. Yet the monastery regards it with an amused patience, tolerating you while expecting restraint. A monk passes you, moving with the kind of ease that comes only after years of rehearsed quiet. His robe sways without a sound, and the faint weight of his steps seems almost ethereal, dissipating into the shadows like a secret the corridor was always meant to hold. You follow instinctively, aware of your own audibility. Even your own presence feels loud in comparison, and you adjust your gait, rolling your feet along the floor as delicately as possible, as if you might convince the walls not to notice. You realize, with mild surprise, that communication here is a study in subtleties. Words are rare, gestures are refined. A nod can carry the weight of acknowledgement. An eyebrow twitch might indicate curiosity or sympathy. Sometimes a gentle exhale alone can speak volumes. You experiment quietly, offering a slight inclination of your head to a passing monk, who responds with a minuscule lift of the chin. It is conversation, in a form almost imperceptible, conducted entirely without speech, and in the rare moments when you misstep, literally or figuratively. The corridor absorbs your error like a patient parent, yet reminds you softly that the lesson must be learned. A draught brushes through the hallway, sending a cold shiver along your spine. You tug at your robe, feeling the wool prickling in protest. It is warm enough in places, stubbornly damp in others, reminding you that comfort is not a promised companion here. The fabric molds itself to your shoulders as though correcting your posture, and you imagine it sighing faintly in frustration at your inexperience. Each step along the stone path feels deliberate, measured. Your footsteps become part of a rhythm intended to exist in harmony with the corridor, not to disrupt it. The walls are lined with niches that hold candles, long since burned to stubby remnants. Wax drips like lazy memories along the stone, forming irregular, softened sculptures that capture faint light and shadow. You study them without meaning to, finding comfort in their quiet persistence. There is something oddly tender about the way the corridor cradles history in its nooks and corners, reminding you that this silence is not emptiness, but a vessel holding centuries of quiet diligence. Each candle stub tells you a story in whispers you cannot quite hear. Here. Further down, a set of doors leads to rooms where novices practice their early morning duties. You catch a faint shuffle of sheets, the muted scrape of quills against parchment, the subdued sigh of someone adjusting to the discipline required of their position. You pass these sounds carefully, letting them flow behind you without interruption, and notice how each person moves with deliberate care, their bodies trained in the art of almost invisibility. Even here, there is humour in the earnestness of effort, an absurd dignity in the way humans try to glide without disturbance, as if the world itself had set traps for those who fumble. The corridor's arches repeat rhythmically, framing your path in endless patient geometry. The stone feels cool beneath your fingertips as you brush lightly against the wall, seeking a familiar support. You are not entirely awake, and yet the corridor seems to coax your senses into awareness, demanding focus on the simplest details, the texture of stone, the faint smell of lingering incense, the wool scraping gently across your skin. You begin to notice the little oddities that make this place both sacred and absurd, the way the stone absorbs sound, the way shadows gather near the edges of your vision, the way the light never rushes, moving in quiet, deliberate increments. A soft clatter comes from somewhere deeper in the monastery, wood meeting stone in a muted rhythm, and your ears immediately recognize it as the work of someone engaged in early tasks. You imagine a monk bending over a broom, the straw brushing the floor with patient care, or someone lifting a bucket to refill the kitchen cistern. The sounds are harmless, almost comical in their persistence, yet they maintain a certain dignity in the way they resist becoming intrusive. You carry on, navigating the long hall, with the awareness that every step you take contributes to the chorus of subtle noises and silences. You pass an alcove where sunlight dares to enter, spilling across the floor in a warm rectangle. You pause, letting your eyes adjust to the slight brightness, and notice the dust motes dancing lazily in the shaft of light. They move with the kind of calm attention you suspect is only possible in places where the hours pass in deliberate repetition. You reach out instinctively, as though trying to catch one, and your fingers disturb the air, sending the tiny specks spinning into new patterns. Even such a small gesture feels monumental in this corridor that values every nuance. Time flows strangely here. The silence magnifies minutes into moments that feel longer than they are. You adjust to it gradually, finding the rhythm of your own breathing, the slight shifts of weight on the floorboards, the subtle friction of wool against stone. Your body begins to understand the cadence demanded by the space, slow, patient, unobtrusive, yet fully present. You are learning a language older than speech, one in which attention to small details carries meaning, and where restraint itself becomes a form of devotion. A monk passes again, slightly older, his movements slower, deliberate, carrying a calm authority without a word. He inclines his head almost imperceptibly, acknowledging your presence. You return the gesture, finding in it a small measure of comfort, a silent agreement that you are both part of this world, yet still only partially initiated into its full rhythm. The wool shifts across your chest as you mimic his motion, a constant reminder of the physical negotiation inherent in each step. You continue down the corridor, letting your thoughts drift in the hush. They wander lazily across everything you have noticed so far. The scratch of wool, the occasional sympathetic glance, the cold that seems to have claimed the stones as its own, the echo of soft breaths in the arches. You realize that the corridor has a character of its own, one that is patient, demanding, and ever watchful. It teaches without shouting, corrects without anger, and observes without judgment. You start to appreciate how the monks have learned to become fluent in its subtleties, a language of restraint and careful motion that is difficult to master but endlessly rewarding in its quiet charm. Your steps grow lighter as you become more attuned, the wool rustling less insistently now, your sandals making only the softest impressions on the flagstones. The corridor seems to approve, or perhaps it simply continues its ancient business of observation. A gentle warmth begins to creep into your toes despite the chill, evidence that motion, even quiet motion, brings life into stone and flesh alike. The long passage no longer feels like an obstacle, but a teacher, slow and deliberate, guiding your attention toward details you would have overlooked in the clamour of the ordinary world. By the time you reach the far end of the corridor, you carry with you the lessons of silence, the importance of small gestures, the value of restrained presence, and the gentle humour inherent in earnest, careful effort. Even as your legs protest ever so slightly, even as the wool prickles insistently in ways you cannot ignore, you feel a strange satisfaction. The corridor has imparted something subtle yet enduring, a knowledge of patience, observation, and the peculiar comfort found in being quietly, deliberately present. You step into the adjoining space, leaving the long corridor behind, but the lessons linger. The soft echoes of your footsteps, the brushing of wool, the careful nods and glances, they all continue with you, carried invisibly into the next room, into the unfolding day, and into the still, faintly drowsy understanding that this life, however rigorous, demands attention, subtlety, and an endless capacity for quiet, absurd perseverance. The corridor opens into a wider chamber, and the air immediately shifts. Here, it is warmer, though only slightly, as if the room is aware of the effort it expects from those inside. Light spills from high windows, not harshly, but in a quiet, persistent manner that illuminates dust motes dancing lazily above the long tables. Each table is a stage for concentration. Heavy slabs of wood scarred by centuries of use, ink-stained boards, and scattered sheets of parchment waiting for the careful touch of a novice's hand. You feel the air thicken slightly with the faint, penetrating scent of ink, a mix of soot, honeyed resin, and the sharp tang of iron that seems intent on waking your senses even as sleep still tugs at your eyelids. You find an empty bench and slide onto it, the wood cold and unyielding beneath you. The robe around your shoulders shifts, a familiar weight, and you adjust the sleeves as best you can. Nearby, a quill lies in a small wooden tray, its tip taut, delicate, and more confident than you feel. You pick it up, testing its balance in your fingers. It resists your hesitation with a firmness that is both impressive and faintly intimidating. The ink sits in a small pot beside it, black as a winter pond, waiting patiently for your fumbling attentions. You take a deep breath, inhaling the peculiar perfume of parchment ink and the subtle, almost imperceptible scent of old dust. Each inhalation brings with it a sense of quiet ritual, the weight of the day's first hours already pressing gently upon your shoulders. The monastery is alive around you, though softly, faint scrapes of quills, the whisper of robes moving across stone floors, a distant cough swallowed instantly by stone walls. The room is a sanctuary of attention, a place where silence is heavy but not oppressive, and your own breath feels unusually loud in comparison. The quill meets parchment with a small satisfying scratch. You begin the letters, looping the ink carefully, almost ceremoniously. The shapes are familiar in theory, circles, straight lines, arches, but your hand betrays your inexperience. Tiny tremors ripple through the loops, a subtle rebellion against the patience you attempt to summon. Still, the ink spreads obediently across the page, leaving a trace of permanence. You notice immediately how the letters smell faintly of iron and soot, a reminder that sanctity here carries not only reverence, but also tangible evidence of human effort. Hours pass, or at least they feel as if hours could stretch into days without anyone noticing. Your eyes follow the same patterns over and over, each repetition both soothing and mildly maddening. The quill scratches in rhythmic insistence, and the wool of your robe scratches back against your forearms. Occasionally, you pause to adjust your posture, realizing that the bench does not conform to your expectations of comfort and never will. You inhale deeply, letting the smell of ink, wood, and candle wax anchor you in the present. This, you sense, is the point. Attention without complaint, diligence without flourish. A faint sound drifts from the corridor outside, muffled by stone and distance. You glance briefly, only to remember that in the scriptorum, presence is measured by what is produced on the page, not by idle observation. Every letter is a small exercise in endurance, a delicate negotiation between the body, the mind, and the stubborn demands of sacred ink. You notice the slight tremble in your fingers as you pause between lines, and a quiet smile forms. Perhaps holiness, after all, has a peculiar sense of humour. Time continues its slow, deliberate procession. Your eyes blur at the edges of the letters. The loops become hypnotic, their repetition a soft chant of its own. Each stroke is meditative, though meditation here has a practical, sometimes irritating, edge. You dip the quill again, and the ink spreads in tiny rivulets across the page, insisting that you be precise. You find satisfaction in the moments of success, fleeting as they are, and a faint amusement when the quill wobbles despite your best intentions. Around you, the other novices work with similar focus. Their heads tilt in concentrated angles, robes draped carefully to avoid spillage, hands steady despite fatigue. Occasionally, a soft sigh punctuates the quiet, a note of frustration, or perhaps wonder at how slowly the day unfolds. You feel a kinship with them, bound by the same repetitive task, the same quiet endurance. There is dignity here, yes, but it is strangely tinged with absurdity. To spend hours bending over a single page, coaxing meaning from loops of ink, requires faith in both the mundane and the extraordinary. The scriptorium smells faintly of herbs as well, used to freshen the room, or perhaps to guard against mould in the damp stone. You detect the faintest trace of rosemary, mingling with the more assertive odour of wet wool. The combination is peculiar, but oddly comforting, an aromatic reminder that life continues even amid rigorous discipline. You inhale and exhale slowly, letting the scents settle into memory. The letters on the page continue to grow beneath your hand, looping and curving with a quiet insistence that mirrors the slow rhythm of your own pulse. Your arm grows heavy, the repetitive motion straining muscles you were unaware existed. Yet the quill remains firm, poised between fingers that ache but refuse to relax completely. You dip it again, noticing how the ink gathers on the tip, how it flows with gravity and patience, and how it rewards steady attention with black perfection. It occurs to you that the quill, in its fragile pride, may be a better teacher than any human. It knows nothing but precision and repetition, and in its stubbornness, it mirrors the very principles the monastery seeks to instill. From the corner of your eye, you see a beam of morning light stretch further across the floor. It finds your bench, illuminating the tips of letters you have just formed, and casts shadows that move slowly, gracefully, like gentle hands guiding your work. For a fleeting moment, the repetition feels less like labour and more like communion. You inhale the scent of the ink, the wood, the stone, and the faint trace of herbal freshness, feeling them mingle with the steady weight of your robe. There is a rhythm here that hums beneath consciousness, a silent acknowledgement that effort is its own kind of reward. Hours dissolve into a delicate haze. Your attention shifts, not fully disengaged, but softened by familiarity. The quill moves almost automatically now, following the learned rhythm of the alphabet, the letters curling under your hand with a quiet, mechanical grace. You notice small imperfections and smile faintly. They are reminders that you are human, and that even sanctity has room for mild folly. Your fingers smell faintly of ink, your robe clings in ways both comforting and insistent, and your eyes trace the looping letters in a trance that borders on sleep, yet refuses surrender. At last, a subtle movement across the scriptorium draws your attention. A monk glides past, adjusting a candle, rearranging parchments, all without disturbing the weighty quiet. The simplicity of his actions, combined with the meticulousness of your own work, reinforces a profound realization. The monastery is not a place of loud achievement, but of careful, deliberate persistence. Every motion matters, even the smallest. Every letter, a tiny measure of devotion, and every discomfort, be it wool, cold, or fatigue, a reminder of the peculiar rigour that you have willingly embraced. You pause, quill in hand, taking a long breath and lifting your gaze to the high windows. The morning has strengthened, casting long lines of light across the tables, illuminating the dust and the ink, the rhythm of labour and patience. The scriptorium, with its faintly absurd dignity and gentle demands, holds you completely, insisting that you remain present, that you attend to the minute, and that you endure, in silence, for the sake of tasks far larger than the day itself. And in the quiet of that chamber, with the wool pressing insistently against your shoulders, the ink forming looping letters beneath your hand, and the faint scent of resin and herbs clinging to the air, you begin to understand something subtle and irrefutable. Sanctity in this place smells of ink, feels of scratchy wool, and exists almost entirely in the endurance of small, repetitive acts, and yet despite its rigour, it is strangely, irresistibly compelling. You rise from the scriptorium, shoulders weighted not only by wool, but by the hours of delicate concentration, and follow the narrow corridors that lead you toward the heart of the monastery. The cold air of the hallway is softer here, tempered by the warmth of early labour and the faint residual heat from ovens somewhere deeper in the building. Your robe sways gently with each step, brushing the stone floor and releasing little wafts of wool that carry the quiet persistence of countless mornings like this one. You realise with a faint pang of awareness that the day is not yet over, though your body has long since begun to protest the continuity of it. The refectory door appears at the end of a short passage, larger and sturdier than any you've yet encountered, its wooden surface streaked with the shadows of centuries. A faint draught greets you as you push it open, carrying with it the unmistakable aroma of overcooked cabbage, mingled with warm bread, and something else you cannot quite identify. A faint tang of iron, perhaps, or the lingering residue of stone heat from the ovens. The smell is pervasive, filling the long hall, and somehow it feels simultaneously nourishing and mildly accusatory, as if the food itself is aware of your presence and is quietly judging your appetite. You step inside and immediately sense the ritual at work. Long tables stretch the length of the hall, polished by hands long gone and worn smooth by countless elbows and forearms. The benches are hard and unyielding, designed less for comfort than for subtle encouragement in upright posture. The air carries a layered stillness, not empty, but attentive, like a room holding its breath. Your footsteps make the barest whispers against the floor, careful not to disturb the fragile quiet that seems to have settled over the assembly. Even your robe, so accustomed to motion, feels heavier here, pressing against you as if reminding you of decorum. Monks are already seated, each with their hands folded in silence, heads lowered, faces attentive without expression. The ritual begins not with words, but with a reader whose voice drifts from a distant lectern in the centre of the room. The sound is steady, calm, unhurried, narrating scripture in long measured tones. You realise quickly that the words are less important than the cadence. It is the rhythm, the endless gentle flow that fills the hall and keeps minds tethered to discipline. Your own mind, however, drifts occasionally to the bread and cabbage before you, their aromas insistently reminding you of the practical side of nourishment. You take your place at the table, letting your hands rest on the worn wood. The bench is cold beneath you, sending a faint chill through your legs, and you adjust slightly, settling into a posture that balances attentiveness with survival. The plate before you holds bread, coarse and dense, and a heap of cabbage, cooked until it has softened into a texture somewhere between vegetable and paste. The bread is warm, though only barely, its crust offering resistance to your teeth that is both challenging and satisfying in its own unhurried way. The cabbage, however, is bold in its scent, carrying a persistent tang of overcooking that clings to your fingers and the faint folds of your robe. You take a slow bite, noticing immediately the patience demanded by mastication. The bread resists being chewed neatly, folding stubbornly in your mouth. With every effort, you find yourself practicing careful discipline, aware that each bite is a lesson in patience. A small private smile forms. Perhaps it is the monastery's subtle test, hidden in plain sight. To endure food that refuses convenience, to embrace simplicity with quiet dignity, and to find satisfaction in the slow, deliberate act of eating. The reader continues, his voice a gentle, steady tide washing over the hall. Each syllable stretches lazily, rising and falling in an unhurried cadence, inviting attention without demanding it. You notice that the monotony has a peculiar charm, a sleepy melody that encourages mindfulness even as it lulls you into semi-awareness. The words are foreign and familiar all at once, their meaning less important than their presence. They are punctuation to the act of eating, a rhythm to which even the cabbage seems to adhere. Around you, the other monks perform the same ritual with the same quiet endurance. Hands move delicately from plate to mouth, eyes lower or occasionally glance toward the lectern. You observe subtle variations in posture and expression, the tilt of a head, a faint shift of a hand, the barely perceptible adjustment of a robe. Communication here is almost entirely nonverbal, a dance of nuance and acknowledgement. You mimic the small gestures instinctively, nodding slightly when your neighbour's eyes meet yours, offering a faint, sympathetic smile when a piece of bread proves particularly obstinate. The aroma of the room deepens as the meal progresses, a rich tapestry of scents layered upon one another. Cabbage mingles with the warmth of bread, the faint herbal residue from the kitchen, and the ever-present tang of stone, warmed slowly by the morning sun filtering through narrow windows. Each inhalation carries memory, history, and a peculiar insistence that you be fully present, even when the palate offers mild protests of monotony. Time stretches like a thin veil. The reader's voice continues, steady and unbroken, while your jaw tires from the bread and the cabbage's determined resistance. There is a rhythm here too. Bite, chew, swallow, listen, inhale, exhale. Repetition folds into itself, and you notice how each act, no matter how mundane, carries weight. Even silence is a lesson in patience, as your own thoughts are gently corralled by the discipline imposed on all present. You glance occasionally at your neighbours, studying their calm endurance. Some faces are serene, some faintly amused, all quietly committed to the ritual. No one speaks, and yet communication flows effortlessly through small gestures. A raised eyebrow to note a particularly pungent piece of cabbage, a subtle tilt of the head to acknowledge a pause in the reading. You participate without conscious effort, sensing that these minor acts are as much part of the morning as the bread and ink, as much a test of humility and observation as any prayer. The monotony offers a peculiar comfort. Your eyes half close briefly, the warmth of bread and wool merging with the faint aroma of cabbage, and you feel the room's weight settle over you. Yet the practice of restraint remains. Chew slowly, swallow deliberately, listen attentively. Even the cabbage, obstinate and overcooked, seems to participate in the teaching of patience, reminding you that holiness in this age is as much about endurance as it is about devotion. A distant clatter from the kitchen momentarily punctuates the silence, and you notice the subtle ripple of attention it produces. Hands pause, eyes flick briefly toward the sound, then return to the ritual without comment. The incident is acknowledged in its entirety without speech, a silent testament to the monastery's subtle control over every aspect of its domain. You feel a faint admiration for the quiet mastery, though it is tempered by the persistent tang of cabbage and the slightly stubborn crust of your bread. By the time you set down your utensils, your fingers faintly sticky from dough and cabbage, you are aware of the depth of the experience. The room has shifted something in your perception, the sweetness of quiet, the humour in patient repetition, the almost absurd dignity of endurance. The ritual, unbroken by voices, has wrapped you in a quiet lesson about presence, patience, and the gentle tyranny of routine. You rise carefully from the bench, mindful of the weight of the robe and the unspoken expectation that your movements remain respectful. The hall, now emptying in a slow procession, retains the faint scent of its labours, and the memory of every deliberate chew lingers in your mind. Even as the corridors await your next steps, you carry with you the understanding that in the monastery, food, silence, and scent are as powerful as any bell, any prayer, any ritual. Teaching through their persistence, subtlety, and gentle insistence on attention. You leave the refectory with the faint taste of cabbage lingering in your mouth, breadcrumbs clinging lightly to your robe, and a growing sense of how the day, though young in hours, has already begun to teach you the strange, demanding, and quietly absurd language of monastic life. You leave the refectory with the faint memory of cabbage still clinging to your senses, the monotone cadence of the reader lingering behind like a gentle echo. The corridors now feel lighter, not because the walls themselves have changed, but because your feet carry you with the quiet understanding of someone who has been schooled in endurance. The robe sways against your sides, carrying faint traces of breadcrumbs and stone dust, a tangible reminder of where you've been and what is expected of you next. Outside, the cold has lifted slightly, and the morning sun begins to stretch across the cloisters, brushing the worn stones with warmth that is slow and deliberate. You reach the outer door of the monastery and push it open. The air hits your face with a freshness that is almost shocking in contrast to the indoor chill. The garden awaits, a patchwork of green and brown, carefully tended, yet wild enough to remind you that nature refuses to be completely tamed. Rows of herbs and vegetables stand in patient rows, their leaves glistening with dew and early sun. The scent is immediate, earthy, herbaceous, faintly pungent, and strangely comforting after the austerity of the chapel and refectory. The garden is a different kind of quiet, not hushed by expectation, but by purpose, each plant rooted in both soil and intention. You step onto the narrow path between the beds, feeling the warmth of the sun on your back, a gentle contrast to the stone-cold corridors behind you. The earth beneath your sandals is soft, springy, and slightly damp from the morning dew. You kneel at a patch of thyme, the tiny leaves brushing against your fingers like miniature brushes, releasing a faint, peppery aroma that makes you inhale more deeply than necessary. The soil crumbles willingly between your fingers, warm and alive, a tactile richness that the monastery itself can never quite replicate. For a moment, you're tempted to simply sit here and let your hands sink into the earth, the silence of the stone halls replaced by the quiet pulse of life beneath your fingers. A monk approaches, his own hands already engaged with the garden. He moves deliberately, careful not to disturb what he touches, but not hesitant either. His eyes meet yours briefly, acknowledging your presence before returning to the rhythm of his work. You sense that here, as in the scriptorum, there is a language without words, one that communicates intention through touch, patience, and careful observation. You mimic his gestures, gently loosening the soil around a stubborn root, whispering silently to the thyme to remain cooperative, and find satisfaction in the small yield of your effort. A single sprig, unbroken, fragrant, obedient. The garden stretches in quiet rows, each section dedicated to a particular purpose: healing, seasoning, nourishment, even ritual. You notice plants that seem to challenge the very idea of usefulness. Their leaves are tough, bitter, or pungent beyond reason, yet you are told, without words, without argument, that each has its role. You kneel beside a patch of rue, its leaves serrated and harsh, and trace a finger along the edges. The smell is sharp, medicinal, almost offensive in its intensity, and yet you understand that this plant carries value precisely because it resists immediate comfort. You tuck a small sprig carefully into a basket, feeling its weight and acknowledging the irony that usefulness often arrives disguised as inconvenience. The sun moves slowly across the garden, highlighting the textures of leaves, soil and stone, You notice the subtle shifts of light and shadow on the plants, the way dew clings to curled edges before evaporating in gentle wisps. The warmth of the earth is a quiet revelation, a reminder that life has a patience and persistence the monastery cannot fully contain. You kneel beside a bed of sage, letting your fingers brush across the fuzzy leaves. Their texture is a gentle resistance, a tactile insistence that teaches attentiveness as effectively as any lecture or ritual. You inhale, letting the aroma fill your senses, and realize that even in discomfort there is learning. Even in toil there is a faint, almost imperceptible delight. As you work, your hands become enmeshed in the daily rhythms of care, loosening soil, removing a stubborn weed, trimming leaves that threaten to encroach upon their neighbours. The weeds themselves are curious creatures, some aggressive, some delicate, all insistent in their right to exist. You pull gently at a patch of nettles, careful to avoid the sting, and marvel at how persistence can be both beautiful and mildly painful. The garden is a lesson in balance. Effort is required, observation is rewarded, and humility is unavoidable. Every touch, every choice carries consequence, however slight, in a world that thrives on subtlety. A breeze moves through the rows, carrying the mixed scent of basil, mint, and thyme. The garden responds, leaves trembling in tiny, coordinated shivers, the sunlight catching droplets of dew that scatter briefly like sparks before settling again. You pause, noticing the way the world seems to shift slightly around your presence. Even the weeds lean toward light, sun, and warmth, and you imagine the small satisfaction they take in thriving despite their assigned purpose. There is quiet humour here, a subtle acknowledgement that life, like the monastery, is devoted to routine, yet finds ways to assert itself anyway. You move from row to row, tending each section with attention that grows more intuitive by the minute. Your fingers trace the edges of rosemary, rub gently along the stalks of oregano, and adjust the small stakes supporting young beans. Every motion is deliberate, every gesture is a form of communication with the living matter around you. You begin to notice how the warmth of the soil presses against your knees, contrasting the chill of your robe and the stone floors you left behind. The garden is generous in its warmth, in its subtle scents, and in the small, almost imperceptible affirmations it offers to careful labour. Hours pass in this gentle rhythm, unnoticed until your hands are faintly soiled, your knees slightly damp, and your senses fully engaged. The garden has a way of commanding presence without insistence. Even the plants that resist, the weeds that seem mischievous or obstinate, are quietly instructive. You realise slowly that every discomfort here is a teacher. The prick of a thorn, the stubbornness of roots, the tang of pungent herbs, the sun's warmth against chilled skin. All are gentle lessons in patience, attentiveness, and the subtle humour of life under constraint. A small bird alights briefly on a nearby fence post, chirping softly before hopping away. The sound seems almost loud in the serene space, and you pause, hand resting in the soil, to notice the moment fully. Even this small interruption becomes part of the lesson. Life continues with or without ceremony, and attention is as much about noticing as acting. You return to your work, brushing away stray leaves, patting soil gently around roots, and adjusting a sprig of thyme that threatens to lean toward the wrong light. Each motion is quiet, deliberate, and reverent in its own peculiar way. The sun has shifted higher now, and warmth permeates more of the garden. Your robe clings differently, less insistently, though the scratch of wool reminds you constantly of human effort and endurance. You gather the final harvest into a basket, noting the weight, texture, and fragrance of each plant. The thyme is sharp and fragrant, the rue bitter and persistent, the sage fuzzy against your fingers. Each carries its own lesson, subtle yet undeniable. You feel a faint sense of accomplishment, mingled with mild amusement. Life here is rigorous, absurd in its demands, yet quietly rewarding in the sensory persistence it offers. You rise from your kneeling position, brushing soil from your hands as best you can, and take a moment to inhale the garden's full aroma. The warmth of the earth, the faint tang of herbs, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant echo of stone corridors behind you, all coalesce into a quiet, deliberate sense of presence. The monastery has taught you discipline through stone, silence, bread and ink, and now the garden insists that you learn patience, observation, and a quiet appreciation for stubborn life. With your basket of herbs in hand, you follow the path back toward the stone corridors, feeling the weight of the robe differently now, part constriction, part comfort, part reminder of the lessons you carry forward. The earth beneath your feet cools gradually, the air shifts subtly, and you sense that the lessons of the garden will linger alongside the echoes of chapel, scriptorum, and refectory. In every leaf, every weed, every stubborn root, there is teaching, patience, and a faint sound, gentle humour, an insistence that the smallest, most unassuming life carries weight far greater than its size might suggest. You leave the warmth and quiet authority of the garden with a basket of herbs, balanced carefully in your hands, feeling the lingering sun on your back and the faint residual scent of earth clinging stubbornly to your sleeves. The corridors beckon you back into the monastery's stone embrace, their coolness a contrast to the sun-kissed soil you have just left. The robe is no less insistent than ever, brushing against your shoulders and sides as though reminding you that duty follows you everywhere. You begin to hear the faint murmur of movement ahead, the distant clatter of tools, the rustle of straw, and the occasional scrape of a broom against stone. These are the sounds of work, manual, persistent, unavoidable. You find yourself in the yard, a wide expanse of gravel and uneven stone paths, where buckets, shovels and rakes are scattered like reminders of tasks that have long outlived their novelty. A monk nods to you in passing, silently gesturing toward the piles of stones that need sorting, the fences that lean as if protesting age, and the thin layer of dust covering every surface that demands attention. The air smells of damp earth, sun-warmed stone, and the faint tang of sweat that already clings to the early workers. You realize immediately that the monastery measures devotion not only in prayer or contemplation, but also in the steady rhythmic exertion of the body. You take up a bucket first, its weight negligible when empty, but surprisingly commanding once filled with water drawn from the stone trough. You lift it carefully, testing the muscles of your shoulders and arms, and feel a peculiar blend of anticipation and mild trepidation. Your muscles object softly, with subtle twitches and twinges you have never noticed before, as if the body is discovering itself anew in the quiet tyranny of labour. You imagine that the monks see this not as discomfort, but as philosophical instruction. Each ache, each strain, a meditation in its own right. The bucket swings against your side as you navigate toward the garden beds that need watering. The rope handle rubs your palm, and you note with mild amusement that even the simplest object insists on teaching patience. Water spills slightly at the edges, making your robe damp along the hem. You inhale the mingled scent of stone, herbs, and wet wool, and find the rhythm of lifting, walking, and pouring, oddly satisfying in its precision. The repetition becomes a quiet chant, your muscles learning the cadence before your mind does, and you are drawn into a meditative engagement with the task. Next comes sweeping. The broom is long and unyielding, its straw coarse against the stone paths, scraping stubbornly with each stroke. You move slowly, deliberately, learning the subtle negotiation required to cover a path evenly, without sending dust swirling into a neighbour's robes, or the air already carrying scents of herbs and damp wood. Your shoulders, now aware of their limitations, murmur complaints through each motion. Yet the broom moves in a steady rhythm, coaxing you into focus, forcing attention to small details that otherwise would escape notice. You find a faint humour in this, the serious dignity of monks paired with the very real indignation of your muscles, and let it settle quietly in your chest. Fences come next. You grip the splintered wood, hammer in hand, nails held precariously between your fingers. The sunlight has warmed the wood slightly, though it still resists the nail's intrusion with determined stiffness. Each strike requires care, persistence, and a soft acknowledgement that pain in the hands is a lesson in vigilance. You lift, adjust, strike again, noticing how your shoulders now carry the memory of lifting the bucket. They remind you that labour, like devotion, is cumulative. A faint grin creeps across your face as you picture the monk's serene approval. If they could see your mildly contorted posture and the soft flinches accompanying every nail you drive. Around you, other monks work in synchrony, though not exactly in unison. The soundscape is a quiet harmony of effort. Buckets clinking, brooms whispering over stone, wood being adjusted and secured, the occasional low sigh of exertion that is more acceptance than complaint. You begin to recognise the subtle etiquette of this labour, the way distance and pace are measured, the way eyes glance only occasionally, enough to coordinate, but never to distract. There is a strange artistry in it, a choreography that is learned slowly through observation, trial and quiet imitation. The sun climbs higher, warming your back and mingling with the sweat forming along your hairline. The robe is now damp in places, the fabric heavy, its weight insisting on endurance. You lift a wheelbarrow, its contents heavier than anticipated, and marvel at the way the monastery equates physical exertion with moral discipline. Your muscles scream softly, yet your mind notices the peculiar charm of the task, a lesson in patience disguised as toil, a philosophy embedded in soreness. Each repetitive action teaches you something subtle about control, endurance, and the quiet triumph of completing a motion with deliberate attention. Even as fatigue settles in, there is a meditative quality to the labour. Each motion repeats, forming an internal rhythm. Lift, walk, set down, sweep forward, sweep backward, hammer, pause, adjust, strike. The repetitive tasks seem almost absurd when considered in isolation, yet their cumulative effect is undeniable. Your shoulders ache in gentle protest. Your hands are roughened by rope, straw, and wood. But each completed task carries a quiet satisfaction. There is humour in the persistence required, a recognition that devotion is sometimes measured less by inspiration than by consistency. You pause briefly, setting a bucket aside, wiping sweat from your brow. The monastery stretches around you. Stone walls, sunlit paths, the faint scent of the garden and herbs lingering, mingling with dust and warmth from labour. A small breeze carries the hint of moss and distant smoke, adding layers to the sensory tapestry. You breathe it in slowly, letting it anchor your awareness in the present, as if the very air participates in the philosophy being taught through effort. Even discomfort carries instruction. The soft ache of muscles is the monastery's gentle admonition, reminding you that attention, patience, and endurance manifest in physical form as much as in mental. By mid-morning, your hands are calloused, your robe clings heavily in places, and your shoulders bear the memory of the bucket, the broom, and the wheelbarrow. Yet there is an unexpected pride in the labour, a quiet, private acknowledgement that each repetition, each deliberate act of lifting, bending, and striking is a thread in the tapestry of your day. The monastery rewards consistency with subtle satisfaction, a lesson in how humility and diligence can intersect with absurdity in the form of sore shoulders and tired arms. A faint smile lingers as you set down the broom, noticing the rhythm of the garden paths, the neatly repaired fences, and the rows of herbs glistening under the sun. Each action has left its mark, however slight, and each has reinforced a principle you are only beginning to articulate. Devotion in this monastery is as much about physical persistence as it is about prayer. Soreness, effort, repetition, and care are all instruments in a larger symphony, one that requires attention, endurance, and a subtle willingness to be quietly amused by the labour itself. As you wipe your hands on your robe, the faint scent of earth and herbs clinging to your fingers, you realise that the philosophy of sore shoulders has taught more than discipline. It has taught patience, observation, humour, and the strange delight of being fully engaged in the mundane. The sun continues to climb, casting shadows along the paths, and your muscles, tired but alert, carry the quiet pride of work well done. Each ache, each strain, each repetitive motion has left a trace, a lesson in persistence, a whisper of the monastery's enduring philosophy, and the gentle reminder that even devotion has its amusing surprises. You set your gaze on the far end of the yard, where more tasks await. Buckets, fences, and sweeping paths stretch in patient succession. Yet for now, you allow a small pause, a deep breath, and the faint satisfaction of knowing that the rhythm, the repetition, and the peculiar delight of sore muscles are fully yours. You carry the lesson forward as you step lightly toward the next task, shoulders remembering, muscles acquiescing, and mind quietly aware that manual labour, like prayer, is a teacher of both the body and spirit. After the sun has warmed your shoulders and the repetitive rhythm of labour has settled into a slow hum of fatigue, you find yourself wandering toward the quieter recesses of the monastery. The yard, now softened by late morning shadows, stretches behind you, its paths glinting faintly with the subtle marks of sweeping, digging, and hauling. Your muscles are pleasantly aware of their exertion, small protests humming under the surface as you carry the lessons of sore shoulders and calloused hands with you. The corridors ahead grow familiar once more, the stone cool underfoot, echoing softly with the gentle scrape of your sandals. And then, at the end of a narrow passage, you see the doorway that promises a different kind of labour, the library. You push open the heavy door and are immediately greeted by the smell of centuries, thick and layered, like a living history trapped between wooden shelves and fragile parchment. Dust rises in pale motes from the floor, disturbed by your hesitant steps, and dances in the streaks of light spilling from high, narrow windows. The sun has shifted, and its rays now highlight the faint scratches, worn edges, and uneven surfaces of books that have survived countless hands, centuries of attention, neglect, and gentle reverence. The air is dry and faintly musty, carrying the tang of old ink and parchment with a whisper of wood polish that hints at attempts to preserve without pretending to defeat time. You inhale deeply, tasting the dust with a peculiar fascination, as though every particle contains the breath of monks long gone. The shelves tower over you, dark and deliberate, stretching toward the ceiling with the quiet authority of objects that have outlasted kingdoms. You step slowly, running a finger lightly along the spine of a tome whose leather has softened into pliable memory. The cover yields to your touch, releasing a faint scent of oil, age, and a subtle hint of chalk. And you imagine the generations of monks who have traced their hands along this same surface, pausing to consult a text, jot a note, or simply marvel at its endurance. The room is silent, but in the hush, every movement, the scrape of your robe, the soft shift of a foot, feels amplified, a reminder that you are a temporary participant in a far older narrative. You pause in the middle of the library, letting your eyes wander over the shelves. Scrolls tied with thin leather cords, parchments stacked unevenly, and books of various sizes and bindings form a kind of of kingdom, one governed by time rather than authority. The dust underfoot crunches faintly as you adjust your posture, and you notice that the room responds to your presence. A quiet settling, a shift in the suspended air, a whisper of acknowledgement from the past. You are not alone here, not truly. You're surrounded by echoes, fragments, and the gentle insistence of knowledge preserved, sometimes imperfectly, always patiently. You reach for a volume bound in dark leather, its cover soft from centuries of handling. Lifting it carefully, you feel the subtle resistance of the pages, each one delicate, yielding under the lightest pressure. The scent of the parchment is immediate, sharp, dry, and faintly sweet, with the faint tang of iron from old ink. You open it, and the script greets you in looping, deliberate strokes, every mark a testament to patience, skill, and subtle humour. You trace a finger along the lines, imagining the hand that first scribed them, the quill's insistence against parchment, and the quiet determination required to create permanence from fragile material. The room feels alive, though in a peculiar, hushed way. Your own breath, shallow but deliberate, mingles with the faint whispers of dust. Every page you turn seems to respond, releasing small clouds of history that settle on your sleeves, your robe, even your hair. Sneezes threaten repeatedly, reminding you that preservation and comfort rarely coexist perfectly. You accept this with quiet amusement, inhaling deeply despite the tickle in your nose, aware that discomfort, in its gentle forms, is a teacher here, as much as diligence or curiosity. The library stretches in unexpected directions, small alcoves branching off, each offering a slightly different landscape of knowledge. You wander slowly, as though each step is a negotiation, a chance to engage with the past without disrupting it. Some shelves are nearly bare, a testament to use or misfortune. Others overflow with manuscripts, delicate as butterfly wings, bound in simple hides, or adorned with inked flourishes that hint at the pride of their creators. You bend slightly to reach one, the leather smooth against your fingers, the pages brittle, yet willing to whisper their contents if handled with care. The act of touching, turning, and inhaling, the history becomes almost meditative, a rhythm that rivals the scriptorum or the garden in its ability to demand attention while rewarding patience. You notice the faint traces of past mistakes, ink smudges, small tears, annotations in tiny, careful script. These imperfections humanize the centuries, reminding you that monks like yourself were not immune to error, fatigue, or mild absurdity. You smile faintly, recognizing a continuity in effort across time. The same patience, focus, and occasional gentle frustration that you have felt in every other part of the monastery are echoed here. Each page is a small testament to endurance, each dust mote a participant in a quiet narrative that spans generations. The library's light changes subtly as the sun arcs higher, casting long shadows across the floors and shelves. Dust motes, once suspended lazily, now spiral in shifting currents, catching in tiny beams of illumination. You step carefully, mindful of the wooden floors that creak faintly, each sound a tiny reminder of fragility, longevity, and the gentle weight of centuries. The combination of smells, aged parchment, ink, wood, and faint traces of previous readers creates a tapestry so dense and nuanced that you feel almost drunk with history, yet fully awake in the way only quiet engagement allows. A table in the centre of an alcove beckons, covered with open volumes and loose sheets. You sit, brushing dust lightly from the surface, and lean over a manuscript filled with diagrams and elegant letters. The work is meticulous, its author long gone, yet the care is evident, every stroke precise, deliberate, imbued with reverence for the knowledge being preserved. Your fingers hover over the page, hesitant, as though acknowledging the effort required to maintain this fragile legacy. You inhale again, the smell of ink and parchment strong in your senses, a faint tickle in your nose reminding you of the library's insistence that history comes with minor annoyances. Time here moves differently. You lose awareness of the sun outside, of the muscles still warm from labour, and of the faint aches of your shoulders. Your attention is absorbed in the loop of letters, the patterns of ink, the subtle annotations left by centuries of hands. Even the dust that settles on your robe seems imbued with meaning, each particle a fragment of lives lived, prayers offered, thoughts pondered, and you realise, with quiet fascination, that knowledge in this monastery is not simply information. It is endurance, care, and an unspoken amusement at humanity's desire to preserve, despite the inevitability of decay. You rise slowly, carrying with you a page or two to return to a desk nearby, mindful of the careful rhythm the library demands. Each step is deliberate, your fingers brushing lightly along the edges of other volumes, as if acknowledging their presence. The room seems to respond in kind. The faint groan of wood, the subtle settling of air, and the slight shimmer of dust in the remaining sunbeams all contribute to a quiet sense of dialogue between you and the accumulated centuries. Knowledge here is tactile, olfactory, visual, and temporal, engaging every sense while offering nothing but its quiet company. When you finally leave the alcove and move toward the exit, the library exhales behind you, a soft sigh of centuries held together in wood, parchment, and ink. You carry the faint taste of dust and the memory of tactile engagement with manuscripts older than most recorded generations. Even as you return to the corridors, to stone, cold floors, and the rhythm of tasks awaiting elsewhere, the library lingers in your senses, a kingdom of quiet authority, subtle amusement, and patient endurance. You realise, gently, that knowledge here comforts, teaches, and insists upon presence, even when it makes you sneeze. You leave the library reluctantly, your fingers still tingling faintly from contact with the fragile pages, and step into the corridors once more. The stone cools under your hands as you brush along the walls, and the faint scent of old wood and lingering ink follows you down the passage. The monastery seems quieter than before, or perhaps your senses are more attuned to subtle sound, the soft creak of beams, the whisper of wind through a narrow window, the faint shuffle of another monk moving in the distance. Even the air feels deliberate, dense with the weight of centuries, yet forgiving in its warmth. You realise the day is beginning its descent into afternoon, yet the demands of discipline linger, like an invisible rope guiding you toward purpose. The abbot's quarters lie at the end of a quieter wing, its heavy door inviting without demanding. You push it open slowly, stepping into a room that is far warmer than the corridor's sunlight spills generously through a lattice of narrow windows, illuminating the wooden floorboards and casting long, calm shadows. The room smells of polished wood, parchment, and something softer, perhaps the faint trace of beeswax used on the candles or the warm, undemanding musk of a hearth unseen. A cat stretches languidly on a manuscript in the centre of the desk, its fur golden and dusted with faint specks of powdery paper. You pause, watching the small creature's slow blink, noting how it has claimed authority with a gentle disregard for convention. The cat's presence immediately softens the severity you had imagined in the figure of the abbot. He rises slowly from a high-backed chair, his robes falling in careful folds, and regards you with eyes that balance expectation and warmth. There is no harshness in his gaze, only the quiet gravity of someone who has long learned the patience required to shepherd lives as delicate and distracted as yours. His voice, when it emerges, is gentle, but carries a calm authority, steady and unhurried, like the rhythm of a bell swinging in distant silence, you feel that every word is chosen deliberately, measured not just for meaning, but for the subtle shaping of attention and intention. Humility, he says softly, is less about posture than it is about presence, and obedience is less about fear than about listening to the rhythm of the day itself. He gestures vaguely toward the window, toward the long corridor behind you, toward the echoing spaces of the monastery. You realize he is speaking not just about behavior, but about the way one inhabits the monastery's quiet discipline, the way attention and care intersect with subtle endurance. Even the cat, stretching and settling again atop the manuscript, seems to participate in the lesson, an indifferent witness to human effort. You bow your head slightly, aware of the warmth radiating from the room and the faint sunlight on your shoulders. There is a strange comfort in his manner. Authority is present, yet it is not heavy-handed. It nudges rather than strikes, guides rather than commands. You sense that this is the kind of power the monastery cultivates, not through intimidation, but through quiet insistence, through example, and through the soft, ever-present reminder that discipline is inseparable from daily life. Even your sore shoulders and calloused hands from morning labour feel like parts of this instruction, subtle, corporeal affirmations of presence and attention. He motions toward a small table, where a scroll lies half-rolled and a quill rests patiently. You approach, noticing the faint smell of ink and beeswax, and feel the tension of being observed softened by the serenity of the room. The abbot's hands, clasped behind his back, mirror your own stillness, and you understand that his patience is as much a tool as any lesson or admonition. You sense the faint humour in his eyes, though it is tempered by the gravity of responsibility. He has long observed the minor absurdities of devotion, and yet treats them as part of the whole. You are reminded of the cat once more, calm, slightly mischievous, and entirely certain of its domain. The conversation flows gently, not interrupted by abrupt demands, but guided by soft questions. He asks about your work in the garden, your efforts in the scriptorum, your attention to silence and movement. You answer slowly, deliberately, aware that the act of speaking is less about conveying information than about participating in the rhythm of expectation. There is no rush, no need to impress. Even missteps are absorbed by the calm authority of the abbot, who listens with a kind of amused patience that feels both comforting and subtly instructive. Every hesitation, every carefully chosen word becomes part of the lesson. Attention is as much about thoughtfulness as it is about action. You notice the small details around the room as you converse. The polished floorboards, worn smooth by centuries of movement. The shelves lined with manuscripts, some older than the walls themselves. The faint scent of dried herbs tucked into small bundles along the windowsill. The cat shifts again, stretching lazily, and the manuscript beneath it bends slightly, yielding in quiet acknowledgement of the animal's claim. Each element seems part of a larger lesson. That authority here is an ecosystem, balanced delicately among people, objects, and even animals, each contributing to the subtle order of daily life. The abbot rises once more, his motion calm and deliberate, and gestures toward a small map of the monastery gardens, the refectory, and the outer paths. He points quietly at the areas still in need of care, not with a stern hand, but with the gentle implication that your attention is required. You follow his gaze and sense the continuity of the day's labour, the work of the garden, the tending of fences, the attention to herbs, all woven together by his soft oversight. There is a peculiar charm in this. Authority is real, yet it is presented as guidance, not coercion. Your muscles, your attention, and even your humour are enlisted in this quiet expectation, and you find yourself subtly willing to comply. He speaks briefly of the day's rhythm, of the movement from manual labour to study, from meals to prayer, and the slow, deliberate pacing that governs everything in the monastery. His voice is calm, imbued with years of observing both devotion and the minor follies of human nature. You are reminded of the scriptorum, the refectory, and the garden, all spaces where attention, persistence, and subtle amusement intersect. The abbot's words now resonate differently, contextualized by the lived experience of effort, discomfort, and observation. Obedience is not abstract here. It is concrete, woven into the tactile reality of the monastery. You watch him settle again behind his desk, the cat curling up atop the manuscript, as if to punctuate the lesson. There is no rush, no dramatization, no heavy-handed authority. Instead, there is the slow accumulation of expectation, like dust on an old shelf or ink staining a page, persistent, subtle, and utterly persuasive. You sense that he understands the minor absurdities of devotion, the strange endurance required by wool, stone, ink, and cabbage, and yet he treats them with respect. Authority here is the gentle insistence of a shepherd, nudging each member of the flock toward responsibility without ever startling them into compliance. As you leave his chambers, the warmth and quiet gravity of the encounter linger, settling softly into your awareness. The corridors feel slightly less austere now, the stone less indifferent, the air carrying faint echoes of calm expectation. You notice the soft rhythm of your own breathing, the faint ache of shoulders and hands, the gentle reminder that discipline, humility, and attention are cultivated in the smallest of acts, as much as in grand gestures. Even the cat, distant now, seems to follow you with its gaze, a silent witness to the continuity of care and the persistent charm of gentle authority. The abbot's lessons are quiet, pervasive, and subtly amusing. You walk down the corridor toward the next task, aware that his expectation is neither burdensome nor trivial, but woven into every corner of the monastery, in the scriptorum, the refectory, the garden, and the yard where your muscles remember the labour of the day. His guidance is a soft current beneath all activity, pulling you toward attentiveness, persistence, and the gentle art of enduring without complaint. You realise with a faint private smile that this is the kind of authority one might regret ignoring, yet can respect quietly, wholly, and with a touch of amused acknowledgement. You step out of the abbot's chambers with the weight of his quiet expectation still lingering, like sunlight settling softly over the stones of the corridor. The air feels different now, charged with a subtle awareness that every movement, every small choice, has its place in a rhythm far older than your own perception of hours or tasks. Your shoulders ache pleasantly from morning labour, your fingers still faintly scented with earth and ink, and your mind begins to drift, noticing how each corridor, each window, and each sunlit patch of floor is slowly aligning itself to a larger, unseen pattern. The monastery has its own heartbeat, and you are gradually learning to move within it. As you wander toward the central cloister, your thoughts begin to follow the subtle arc of time here. The day is marked not by clocks or modern urgency, but by the slow, deliberate cadence of routine. Prayer, work, meals, study, rest. Each moment is a carefully measured note in a quiet symphony. You notice how the seasons shape this rhythm, not in sudden extremes, but in gentle alterations of light, temperature, and scent. In winter, the stone corridors seem colder, more insistent, demanding that every movement conserve warmth. In summer, warmth filters through narrow windows, and the air carries the scent of herbs and sun-baked earth. Even in these variations, there is a sense of repetition, of returning, of sameness, and yet, somehow, the day is never exactly the same twice. You follow the faint echoes of distant bells toward the refectory, noting the subtle differences in light as it passes through the arched windows. You remember breakfast now a distant memory of bread, cabbage, and the monotone cadence of the reader. Dinner will arrive eventually, but in this moment you focus on the space between events, the quiet awareness of hours measured in repetition. The monotony is not oppressive, rather it carries its own small comforts. Even the simplest variations, a slightly warmer porridge, the faintly sharper tang of cabbage, the sun caught in a different angle across the floor, become evidence that time is passing, gently, insistently, in its own deliberate fashion. You wander past the garden, now resting in quiet sun, and notice the subtle transformations that mark the passage of days. Leaves shift slightly, new shoots emerge, dew evaporates differently in each sunbeam. The herb garden, which seemed eternal and immutable in the morning, now carries subtle evidence of change. Soil dried by sunlight, faint shadows of recently harvested herbs, and the small, unremarkable alterations that signal both constancy and difference. You realize with mild astonishment that the unchanging rhythm of labor and study is punctuated by countless, tiny, almost imperceptible shifts, like the faint optimism of porridge that has been warmed more generously than yesterday. The cloister itself seems aware of the season's influence. Light stretches across worn stones differently, casting long, gentle shadows in one corner and illuminating the worn edges of benches in another. You pause to let your hand rest briefly on the smooth surface of a stone wall, noticing the subtle warmth it has accumulated from hours of sun. Even the air is textured differently, slightly heavier with moisture near the fountain, faintly scented with herbs drifting from the garden, carrying the distant echo of labor and study. You inhale slowly, letting the awareness of seasonal rhythm settle in your chest. Each small sensory shift becomes a marker of time, a gentle proof that days, though formally unchanging, possess quiet, deliberate differences. You begin to notice the other monks moving along similar paths, each absorbed in their tasks, study, or prayers. There is a curious harmony in this, a silent choreography that binds the community together. The gardener bending carefully over herbs, the scribe hunched over a page, the novice moving deliberately between tasks. Each person's rhythm contributes to a subtle, collective understanding of time. Work measured not in hours but in acts. Prayer unfolding not in rush but in cadence. Meals approached with the gentle dignity of attention. You feel both a part of this flow and a quiet observer, noting how the ordinary repeated gestures create the illusion of unchanging days while layering subtle variation upon variation. You pause briefly in the scriptorum, noticing the sunlight catching the edges of parchment and illuminating faint dust motes in the air. Each page seems to reflect the passage of time differently, dependent on light, wear, and the rhythm of hands that have touched it for decades, centuries. You run a finger lightly over the edge of a manuscript, feeling its uneven surface, and notice the faint warmth of a page turned moments before. Time here is tactile, visual, and olfactory. Even the faint scent of ink and paper seems to carry memory. The devotion of hands, long gone, the soft guidance of repetitive labour, and the quiet insistence that each day, though similar to the last, is subtly distinct. As you walk along the cloisters toward the refectory for a late meal, your thoughts turn to the calendar itself. Feasts, fasts, holy days and ordinary days all blend into a rhythm of expectation and surprise. Some days are long in prayer, some in labour, some are marked by celebrations, others by quiet reflection. You notice how the anticipation of each moment shapes perception, the slight eagerness for bread warmed with a little more care, the satisfaction of labour completed, the small but telling differences in the garden or scriptorum. There is a charm in this slow unfolding, an understanding that the unchanging surface of each day is offset by infinite subtle variations in experience. You catch yourself noticing the faint interplay of warmth and chill across stone and floor, the movement of sunlight through narrow windows, and the quiet shuffle of fellow monks moving between tasks. Each observation becomes part of the calendar's invisible language. Days are mapped not in hours, but in sensation, attention, and gentle participation. You begin to see the rhythm as a kind of meditation, one where patience and observation are rewarded with awareness. Even monotony carries instruction, a teaching embedded in routine, repetition, and the almost imperceptible differences from one day to the next. Walking past the refectory, you catch a faint aroma of bread baking, mingled with the lingering scent of herbs from the garden. The sensory markers of time accumulate: warm floors in the scriptorum, the faint chill in the cloisters, the tang of overcooked cabbage at meals, the subtle differences in light across the corridor. You recognize that, although days appear identical in structure, the details, scent, sound, touch, subtle warmth, reveal the gentle progress of time. The calendar is not simply a list of feasts and fasts, but a lived experience, measured in effort, awareness, and endurance. Even in monotony, you find rhythm. Even in repetition, you perceive subtle novelty. By the time you return to your cell for a brief pause, your body carries the accumulated memory of the day. Shoulders softened by labour, hands faintly scented with ink and earth, feet familiar with stone, and your mind attuned to the faint variations that mark each passage of time. You sit briefly on the edge of your bed, noticing the warmth of wool against skin, the fading sunlight, and the quiet comfort of routine that is both predictable and endlessly instructive. The unchanging nature of days does not feel oppressive, but rather gently coaxing, reminding you that discipline, patience, and observation are cultivated as much in repetition as in reflection. You close your eyes for a moment, allowing the awareness of the monastic calendar to settle. The slow arc of seasons, the subtle shifts of sunlight, the faint variations in labour, study, and prayer, and the quiet humour embedded in endurance. Each day, though formally identical, carries the mark of subtle differences, a small optimism in warmth, smell, sound, and light. You realise that in this repetition, there is a quiet lesson, that presence, patience, and attention are cultivated not in grand gestures, but in the careful observation of seemingly unremarkable days, each slightly varied, each gently demanding, each subtly rewarding. The quiet of evening settles over the monastery like a soft, inexorable tide. You emerge from your cell, leaving the warmth of wool and the lingering scent of the day's labour behind, stepping into corridors where shadows pool in the corners and the stone floor retains the memory of sunlight long since departed. Your shoulders still carry the gentle weight of work, and your hands remember ink, earth, and the tactile persistence of labour. Yet now the rhythm of the day begins to bend into something less predictable. Night, a slow unfolding of ritual, expectation, and deliberate discomfort. You follow the faint glow of candles lining the path toward the chapel, their flickering light casting long, wavering shadows against the walls. The smell of melted wax mingles with the faint chill of stone, forming a sensory reminder that comfort is a luxury, carefully rationed here. Your feet scuff softly against the worn floor, each step measured, deliberate, and almost apologetic, as though the very act of moving must be negotiated with the sleeping air of the monastery. The corridors hum with quiet anticipation, the faint shuffle of robes, the occasional creak of a door, the whisper of breath moving toward devotion. Inside the chapel, the air is colder still, carrying the faint scent of incense long ago burned and now mingling with the stone's natural dampness. Candles, arranged meticulously along the altar and windowsills, throw pools of light across the worn wooden pews, illuminating faint scratches and stains that records centuries of devotion. And the occasional misstep, you settle onto a bench, letting your hands rest lightly on its smooth surface, feeling the subtle vibration of your own heartbeat, mingling with the faint rhythmic echo of distant footfalls. The cold settles into your toes, teasing them gently, reminding you that discomfort is an inseparable companion of devotion here. The first chants begin softly, their tones rising in the darkness like a river threading through stone. You close your eyes briefly, letting the sound wash over you, a delicate mixture of clarity and drowsiness. There is a strange comfort in the repetition, a slow hypnotic rhythm that balances attention and fatigue. Yet, even as the music draws you into its cadence, you notice the minor absurdities of your situation. Toes slowly turning numb, shoulders aching from earlier exertion, the faint stiffness of hands used to ink and soil rather than folded in prayer. And still, there is beauty here, a gentle acknowledgement that devotion can be both sublime and mildly ridiculous. You shift slightly on the hard bench, trying to balance warmth against posture, comfort against expectation. The candlelight flickers across faces of fellow monks, revealing closed eyes, furrowed brows, and the occasional subtle twitch of someone fighting drowsiness. The air carries quiet inhalations, small movements of robes, and the muted whispers of the occasional turning page in a psalter. Even in darkness, the rhythm of vigilance is insistently structured. The rise and fall of chants, the soft footfalls of monks moving to incense or repositioning, the gentle toll of a distant bell marking time. You sense that endurance here is as much about attention to subtle patterns as it is about the suppression of complaint. The cold seeps deeper into your body, particularly along toes, knees and fingers. You flex them gently under the bench, testing the limits of sensation, discovering the delicate balance between numbness and pain. The act is almost meditative, noticing, adjusting, persisting. Even your drowsiness participates in this rhythm, pulling you towards slumber while the chants insist upon wakefulness. You become aware of the absurdity of the dual demands, attentive presence in the service of devotion, and patient tolerance of discomfort. But the monastery seems to insist that this is the essential point: to endure without overt complaint, to engage fully with both body and mind, to cultivate the quiet grace of acceptance. Time bends here in ways unfamiliar to you. The night stretches and contracts, measured not by clocks but by ritual, by the slow progress of candles burning down, by the soft cadence of voices lifted in unison. Your thoughts drift gently, tracing the day's labours, the library's dusty wisdom, the abbot's calm guidance, the garden's stubborn weeds, and the scriptorium's infinite letters. Each memory is tinted now by the dim candlelight, refracted through the lens of fatigue, devotion, and faint amusement. You notice the surreal quality of the experience, aware, present, yet suspended, floating in a kind of slow-motion consciousness that only night vigils can produce. A faint draught brushes across your shoulders, carrying the smell of distant stone and cold air from narrow windows. You adjust your robe, drawing it tighter, noticing how even small movements require negotiation with both discomfort and dignity. The air is heavy with history, centuries of monks who have leaned against these benches, lifted their voices in song, endured the chill, and found a rhythm in repetition. You breathe in the mixture of wax, stone, and lingering incense, feeling it anchor you in the continuity of practice. The absurdity of the frozen toes is now tempered by an awareness of shared experience, by the gentle realization that everyone here participates in the same curious exercise of patience. The chant continues, its melody looping, rising and falling like waves over stone. You follow its rhythm with eyes half closed, tracing the movement of sound, imagining the breath of centuries in each note, even the occasional cough, the soft rustle of a robe or the faint creak of a bench adds texture to the music. A reminder that devotion is neither flawless nor purely aesthetic. It is instead a combination of effort, endurance, humility, and subtle humour, a tapestry woven of intention, bodily sensation, and mindful attention. You recognise that this is the essence of the night vigil, a disciplined engagement with discomfort, repetition, and the strange beauty of persistence. You shift again, careful not to disturb the neighbouring monk, noticing how that your body has learned to accommodate both the cold and the expectation of stillness. Each movement is deliberate, measured, and subtly amusing in its disproportionate attention to minor discomforts. Even your thoughts begin to move in a rhythm synchronized with the chant. Inhale, exhale, note the cold, refocus on sound, notice toes, return attention to melody. The repetition is gentle, hypnotic, and strangely calming, an exercise in endurance that also cultivates awareness of subtleties otherwise lost in the busyness of day. Minutes stretch and fold into each other, each one indistinguishable in structure, but subtly different in detail. A candle flickers in a new pattern, a page rustles unexpectedly, a distant footstep lands slightly sooner or later than before. You observe these variations with soft amusement, recognizing that the night vigil, like every other monastic practice, teaches patience through a combination of constancy and infinitesimal change. The art of not complaining, you realize, is both practical and philosophical. An awareness that discomfort is inevitable, repetition is natural, and endurance is cultivated in small, quiet increments. By the final hours, the cold has become part of your consciousness, integrated into your awareness rather than resisted. You feel the deep, peculiar satisfaction of having persisted through discomfort, without overt protest, the subtle triumph of presence maintained over fatigue, and the quiet humour inherent in the minor indignities of cold toes and stiff fingers. Candlelight pools around you in soft halos, highlighting stone, wood, and the faint traces of centuries of devotion. The chants begin to fade, replaced by silence, punctuated only by faint breath, rustling robes, and the distant, patient tick of unseen time. When the vigil finally concludes, you rise slowly, muscles stiff but alert, toes thawing with careful attention, and breathe in the calm aftermath. The chapel, once filled with music and ritual, now hums faintly with memory, the warmth of collective effort, the persistence of attention, the gentle absurdity of human endurance. You step back into the corridor, aware that your mind, body, and spirit carry the quiet imprint of this night, an intimate understanding of ritual, patience, and the subtle art of not complaining, woven seamlessly into the broader tapestry of the monastery and the day that has now come full circle. The chill of the night still clings to your bones as you awaken in the early hours, the memory of the vigil lingering like a gentle echo across your shoulders. Your toes slowly thawing remind you that comfort is a fleeting companion in the monastery, and you rise reluctantly, muscles stiff yet familiar with the quiet ache of attention. As you move through the hallways, the cold stone brushing against your fingertips, you notice a new sense of awareness settling over your body, not merely a fatigue but a fragility. The monastery is full of reminders that you are human, prone to weariness, and subject to the whims of both your own body and the passage of time. A gentle murmur draws you toward the infirmary, a room tucked behind a quieter wing, where faint light spills through narrow windows, illuminating the walls with the calm certainty of purpose. The smell of dried herbs and warm water greets you first, a scent both soothing and slightly pungent, promising relief tempered by the subtle tang of tinctures and poultices. You step inside, noticing the faint sound of whispered prayers, murmured both by attendants and the patients themselves. The air is warmer here, humid with steam and the gentle labour of care, yet carries the same quiet insistence on attention and discipline that governs every corner of the monastery. A monk tending the sick nods to you with a soft seriousness, motioning toward a small wooden bed where a fellow novice rests. The sheets are coarse and slightly stiff, the mattress firm, and the pillow modest in its support. Even in the midst of care, the austerity of the monastery asserts itself. You observe, with a curious mix of fascination and empathy, how illness here is treated not with urgency or dramatic interventions, but with methodical gentleness. The careful application of herbal compresses, the slow brewing of infusions, and the low murmur of prayers repeated in rhythm with measured breaths. The remedies themselves carry the dual essence of practicality and faith, blending tactile care with spiritual attentiveness. You're invited to sit near a small table where dried bundles of herbs are arranged neatly, their faint colours muted by age and subtle dust. Sage, rosemary, thyme, and a few plants whose names escape you mingle together, and you inhale slowly, noticing how each scent seems to carry a story of labour, attention, and centuries of trial. A novice demonstrates the preparation of a poultice, crushing leaves with deliberate motion, then placing them on a warm cloth to be applied to aching limbs. The process is meticulous, almost ceremonial, each movement infused with the knowledge that healing here is a slow negotiation between body, mind, and spirit. The infirmary smells of warmth and moisture, mingled with faint traces of medicinal wine, vinegar, and the earthy aroma of freshly turned herbs. You notice the rhythm of care, a gentle adjustment of a patient's pillow, the soft hum of a prayer, the slow pouring of an infusion, the delicate application of ointment to a bruise or sprain. There is humour here too, though gentle and quiet, the recognition that even in holiness, bodies remain awkward, human, and prone to inconvenience. You catch yourself smiling faintly as a fellow monk winces at the cold touch of a compress, yes, his grimace mirrored in your own memory of frost-numbed toes and stiff shoulders. You are asked to assist with a minor task, the preparation of an herbal tea for a patient with a mild fever. The leaves are steeped carefully in warm water, released slowly to mingle with the steam rising from the vessel. You inhale the vapour, noting the faint bitterness tempered by warmth, and understand with calm amusement that this simplicity is deliberate. The monastery's remedies are never excessive, never indulgent, yet strangely comforting in their modest efficacy. The act of preparation becomes a meditation. Attention to detail, awareness of sensory change, and the quiet satisfaction of creating relief, however minor. Across the room, a patient stirs slightly, prompting a gentle prayer from an attendant who rests one hand lightly on the novice's shoulder. You observe the subtle interplay of care and faith, of ritual and tangible attention. The touch of warmth, the sound of whispered blessing, the faint scent of herbs pressed against the skin. Even in the simplicity of these gestures, there is tenderness and purpose. You realize that the monastery treats illness not as a failure or interruption, but as an integral element of life, a reminder of the body's vulnerability, the mind's patience, and the spirit's endurance. You notice that remedies often involve repetition, a careful layering of interventions, and prayers, each designed to reinforce the other. Compresses are applied more than once, teas steeped and reheated, prayers murmured repeatedly to mark attention and intention. In this you detect the familiar rhythm of monastic life. Repetition is not punishment, but pedagogy. Each cycle trains both caregiver and patient in the art of patience, acceptance, and subtle endurance. You feel a quiet kinship with the body of the sick monk, aware that you too are subject to these lessons, even without fever or ailment. The infirmary is both functional and oddly comforting. Wooden benches line the walls, shelves hold jars of tinctures and dried plants, and small windows admit light that shifts slowly across the room as the day progresses. You notice the faint heat radiating from steaming pots, the soft rustle of linen, and the occasional cough, each element a marker of the living rhythm of care. You begin to perceive the space not merely as a place of healing, but as a theatre of human fragility, an intersection of observation, faith, and gentle ritual, where patience and persistence are cultivated alongside remedies. You assist with another minor task, arranging freshly washed linens and distributing them to the resting monks. The fabrics are coarse and slightly scratchy, yet carry a faint warmth from drying over wooden racks. You feel a subtle satisfaction in this act, observing how even the simplest gestures, folding cloth, adjusting blankets, offering a sip of warm tea, create a tangible form of care. Each action, though modest, participates in a larger rhythm, weaving attention, gentleness, and humility into the fabric of daily life. You realize that the monastery measures compassion not in grand gestures, but in sustained, deliberate practice. Throughout the morning, the faint hope embedded in the repeated phrase, "God willing," becomes a subtle rhythm of its own. Every adjustment, every poultice, every whispered blessing is accompanied by the quiet awareness that outcomes are uncertain, that bodies recover according to rhythms beyond immediate control. You sense a paradoxical comfort in this. The acknowledgement of fragility is itself stabilizing, a gentle insistence that you must do what you can, accept what you cannot, and cultivate calm, patient attention in all matters. The humility required in these interactions is at once grounding and oddly empowering. By mid-morning, the novice whose fever you helped tend is resting more comfortably, the warmth of poultices and tea settling into the body. You step back, noticing the faint sheen of sweat on his brow, the slow rise and fall of his chest, the slight relaxation of shoulders that were tense from discomfort. The room carries a gentle satisfaction now, a mixture of care given and accepted, of attention paid and recognized. Even the faint traces of fatigue in your own limbs seem lighter, carried as they are within the rhythm of shared labor and deliberate attentiveness. You understand gently that the infirmary teaches more than healing. It teaches endurance, patience, humor, and the subtle recognition that human frailty is inseparable from the experience of living in a monastery. As you leave the infirmary, the air outside feels cooler, the corridors more familiar. The scent of herbs and warm water lingers faintly on your hands and robe, a gentle reminder of the lessons embedded in care. The day continues, yet your understanding of fragility, endurance, and tender observation is now deeper, carried not only in memory, but in muscles, fingers, and the faint warmth left by contact with healing hands. The monastery, in its quiet insistence, has transformed illness into a slow, gentle curriculum, a series of experiences in attention, observation, patience, and subtle delight in the careful art of remedying without complaint, even when uncertainty persists. The faint warmth of the infirmary lingers on your fingers and robes as you leave, carrying with you the memory of poultices, whispered prayers, and the subtle patience required to care for bodies that insist on reminding you of their limits. You step into the cloisters, and the air has cooled again, bearing the gentle scent of damp stone, distant herbs, and the faint echo of labour from earlier in the day. The sun hovers low over the horizon, casting elongated shadows across arches and benches, gilding the worn stones with a soft amber light that seems both ephemeral and eternal. Every edge, every corner, every subtle irregularity of the cloister's walls appears to glow with a calm insistence. Here, the day has been lived fully, and now, slowly, it is bending toward rest. Your feet carry you forward without urgency, each step soft against the worn stone, each movement echoing faintly in the empty spaces of the cloister. You feel the subtle ache of shoulders, hands and toes, the accumulated evidence of labour, study, prayer and vigilance. These aches are familiar now, like companions who have walked beside you through weeks of early mornings, long hours of copying letters, tending gardens, hauling water and enduring the chill of stone. They are reminders, quiet yet persistent, that life in the monastery is an intimate negotiation with discomfort, persistence, and deliberate attention. The smell of the gardens drifts toward you, mingling with the faint scent of burning wax from the chapel candles, and you pause briefly to let it settle in your awareness. Herbs lean slightly in the evening breeze, leaves catching the light, small seeds dangling in tentative balance. The garden feels alive with the quiet persistence of growth and care, a reminder that even in ordered lives, the natural world follows rhythms of its own, subtle and unhurried. You breathe slowly, noting the faint warmth left in the soil from the day's sun, the tactile memory of softened earth under your hands, and the curious satisfaction that comes from contributing, however modestly, to its ongoing cultivation. You notice other monks moving along familiar paths, the gardener finishing a final check of herbs, the scribe closing a manuscript, a novice adjusting the alignment of robes. Each movement is deliberate, measured, and subdued, a choreography of quiet attention, yet infused with individual idiosyncrasies. A faint shuffle of feet, a subtle smile, a hesitant glance toward the chapel. The interactions are unspoken, yet rich with mutual understanding. The monastery communicates in subtleties, gestures, postures, shared glances, and you find yourself part of this silent conversation, aware of its rhythms and meanings, attuned to its delicate harmonies. The cloister fountain murmurs softly nearby, its water catching the last light of the sun, and you allow your attention to drift with its gentle sound. The fountain's trickle mingles with the faint sigh of the wind through arches and the occasional call of a bird returning to its roost. These sounds, subtle yet persistent, create a backdrop against which the day's accumulated experiences, cold toes, hot herbs, scratchy wool, overcooked cabbage, begin to coalesce into a quiet understanding. You recognize that the small discomforts, the repetitive labor, and the deliberate attention to ritual are all woven into a larger pattern, a rhythm of care, persistence, and presence that stretches beyond any single day. The sun sinks further, and the amber light softens into a gentle rose, washing over the walls and reflecting faintly in the small windows of the abbot's quarters. You recall his calm gaze, the quiet guidance, the way authority had been present without harshness, nudging rather than commanding. The memory carries a gentle weight, a subtle recognition that the monastery structure is less about rules and more about shaping attention, cultivating patience, and fostering quiet endurance. Even now, as you walk, you sense his influence in the rhythm of your steps, in the attention you pay to shadow, stone and sound, and in the faint humour that persists in acknowledging human folly within devotion. The chapel looms ahead, faintly illuminated from within, candles flickering against the evening shadows. You glance toward it, remembering the vigils, the cold floors, the chants that both lulled and demanded attention. The memory is vivid, toes gradually numbed, hands stiff, and yet a subtle pleasure in participating fully in the rhythm. in surrendering to repetition without complaint. You realize that the discomforts, the minor indignities, and the tedious routines have all contributed to this strange dreamlike awareness that holiness, discipline, and human persistence carry both gravity and gentle absurdity. As you continue walking, you pause to look at the monastery's walls, noting the texture of worn stone, the faint marks of centuries, and the subtle variations in colour created by moss and sun. Every crack, every chip, every uneven edge tells a story of monks long gone, of quiet labour, of human persistence in the face of cold, hunger, and fatigue. The tactile history is palpable, a whisper of time embedded in stone. You run a finger lightly along a wall, feeling its roughness and sense a connection, not merely to the past, but to the cumulative efforts of attention, patience, and care that have shaped the monastery itself. Even the smallest gestures, like tending an herb, copying a letter, or enduring a vigil, contribute to a legacy visible only to those willing to notice. The refectory is silent now, its benches empty, the faint scent of past meals lingering in the air, bread, cabbage, and the mild tang of wine. You remember your seat there, the quiet attentiveness required, the subtle humour in the monotony, and the unspoken dialogue with fellow monks. The memory is comforting, a testament to the gentle discipline that defines this life. Each repetition, each small endurance, has left an impression, and you feel a delicate gratitude for the way daily acts of attention have shaped your understanding of patience, humility, and presence. You pause once more in the cloister, the sky now deepening toward twilight, and the first stars faintly appearing overhead. The wind has calmed, and the air carries the subtle chill of evening, tempered by the lingering warmth of stone and sun. You notice the interplay of light and shadow across arches and benches, the soft curve of worn edges, the subtle variations in texture and tone that make each glance unique. Even in the apparent sameness of the day, you recognize the infinitesimal differences. The warmth of sunlight, the angle of a shadow, the faint fragrance of a leaf pressed beneath a heel. These details, often overlooked, have become markers of lived experience, gently teaching the persistence of observation, the cultivation of patience, and the quiet humour embedded in human effort. As you continue your walk, the monastery seems to breathe around you, a living presence composed of stone, wood, water, herbs, and the countless small acts of devotion performed over centuries. You sense how each day, though seemingly repetitive, carries subtle variation and depth, shaping not only your actions, but your perception, your patience, and your understanding of endurance. The cold mornings, the early vigils, the scratchy wool, the endless copying, the monotonous meals, all converge now into a quiet appreciation of rhythm, repetition, and the persistence of human attention in a carefully ordered world. By the time you reach your cell, the light has faded to a gentle indigo, the air carrying the faint coolness of approaching night. You pause, placing your hand on the wooden latch, feeling the smoothness worn by countless openings and closings. The day has reached its conclusion, not in a dramatic flourish, but in the slow, deliberate settling of experience. The accumulation of labour, observation, discomfort, devotion, and faint amusement. You breathe in slowly, the scent of herbs, stone, and candlelight lingering, and allow a sense of quiet understanding to settle over you. The day has been lived fully, its lessons etched into muscles, senses, and memory, leaving you with the delicate recognition that human beings, in their endless pursuit of meaning, have always endured cold floors, scratchy robes, and endless repetition, all for the subtle, ineffable reward of presence, attention, and shared persistence. You lie down on your modest bed, feeling the warmth of wool against your skin and the faint fatigue of fully engaged muscles. The sounds of the monastery fade to distant echoes, a bird settling for the night, the soft sigh of wind, the faint murmur of a distant bell. You close your eyes, reflecting on the odd mixture of peace and discomfort, devotion and faint absurdity, work and observation. In this quiet, suspended state, you sense the strange consolation of stone walls, candlelight, cold mornings, and shared labour. A gentle acknowledgement that humans have always sought meaning, even when it leads to early waking, frozen toes, and cabbage-scented refectories. You drift slowly towards sleep, carrying the rhythm of the day with you. Labour, prayer, attention, endurance, and the quiet humour that softens each trial. The monastery breathes around you, timeless and patient, and you understand, perhaps for the first time, that regret and devotion are not opposites here, but companions, small subtle teachers, guiding each day into the next, until night's final quiet reminds you that even in the austerity of stone, candlelight, and wool, life is full of wonder, persistence, and unexpectedly tender grace. And that brings us to the end of tonight's story. Feel free to like, subscribe, or leave a comment with another forgotten corner of history you'd like explored next. If you'd like early access to more of these quiet descents into forgotten history, ad-free audio of the episodes, or just want to support the show, there's a link to the Patreon in the description. If you're listening on a podcast app, a rating or review helps more people find their way to these stories. And special thanks to the supporters who make this show possible, including our chroniclers, Andrew S., Rich Davis, and Leslie Schofield. Sleep well.